I love doggos so much, and I have a feeling that you do as well. That's why I'm very excited to partner up with Embark. They are a dog DNA testing kit, and they are amazing. I've done it on both of my pups. Top shelf. Love what they do. So go to embarkvet.com, and this will get you free shipping and save $60 with this promo code RAY, R-A-Y. So visit embarkvet.com to get free shipping and save $60 with the promo code RAY. Test your doggos, find out so much about them.
Tired of long waits and rushed care at the ER and urgent care clinic? Next time, stay home and let Dispatch Health bring the power of the hospital to you.
I call Dispatch Health. A care team of medical professionals actually come to your house.
They're the same caliber of people that you would see if you were at a hospital or an urgent care.
Dispatch Health can treat most non-life-threatening emergencies.
They can do the x-rays, they can do stitches,
urinary tract infections, blood test, urinalysis, ultrasound.
It's almost everything that they can do at the ER.
You never feel rushed. They're there for you and only you.
I felt like their only patient.
And it costs no more than a trip to urgent care because Dispatch Health is covered by most insurance, including Medicare. See if we serve your home at dispatchhealth.com.
Dispatch Health really went above and beyond.
It's wonderful to have care come to your home.
House calls are back, and they're better than ever. Learn more at dispatchhealth.com.
Are you crime curious? iHeartPodcasts has gathered the best true crime all in one podcast feed. iHeart True Crime Plus. It's packed with podcasts about unsolved murders, missing persons, organized crime, and more. So there's always something good to binge and share. iHeart True Crime Plus subscribers also enjoy ad-free listening, early access to select episodes, and exclusive bonus content. Subscribe to iHeart True Crime Plus today, exclusively on Apple Podcasts.
You're listening to 100 Words or Less with Ray Harkins. What's up, everybody? How are you doing this fine afternoon or evening or whatever it is you're listening to this show? I appreciate it because there's so many other things you could be doing, but you are spending time with people who care about independent music, the conversations around that, why it's important, how it places in context, and ultimately why we celebrate this whole DIY culture and punk and hardcore and all that fun stuff. So I just always like to, remind you why you're listening. But I mean, maybe you're listening to this on a, week-to-week basis, or maybe you're just checking in once a month. Regardless, I'm incredibly excited to bring you today's episode from frankly, a podcaster hero of mine. His name is Nate DiMeo. He hosts a podcast called The Memory Palace, who, if you have not checked it out, I highly encourage you to do it. It's basically, less than 10 minutes, often like maybe 7-8 minutes, but it's a really specific dive into a historical character, a figure, but the way that Nate does it is, it's just really special. And he's been doing this show for many, many years. And he's just a talented dude. And I knew that he had a history of, being connected to the punk and hardcore scene via a mutual friend of ours, a guy named Wed Mar, who came on this show many moons ago. But we were finally able to make this discussion happen, and boy, his love for Ebullition Records and a lot of the early screamo stuff is really evident, and that's what we dig into in this conversation, amongst many other things. But if you just know Nate as a podcaster, let me get ready to blow your mind. And if you don't know Nate at all, and this is your introduction, you're going to be so stoked, and then you're going to check out his podcast, and you're going to like it that much more. But let's talk about some business pleasantries. How about you email the show, 100wordspodcast@gmail.com. It's always open, ready to, respond to any other ideas or whatever the case may be. I just always love to hear that feedback. Maybe someone just started diving into the show. I actually just got in contact with an old friend who I hadn't spoken to in many years. And he was like, oh man, I found out about your show and didn't know it was you. And then now I do. And here we are. So do that. And you can also please leave a review on Apple Podcasts, because it helps legitimize the show. So if you haven't done it, everybody asks you to do these little 5-second things, but maybe take the time today and do that. I would really appreciate that. And also support the advertisers in this show. Like, when you hear my voice talking about a particular advertiser, that means I wholeheartedly endorse the thing. And, I don't do any sort of like Patreons or any other things to support this show. So I'm solely relying off of the advertising revenue to, keep this puppy afloat. So if you wouldn't mind doing that, I appreciate all three of those things. And even if you don't do any of them, I still appreciate you. So let's dive into Nate. Like I said, you need to listen to The Memory Palace. It's one of my favorite podcasts out there. And he's also a great writer in regards to humor. Wrote on Parks and Rec, and he's currently doing a screenplay, if I'm not mistaken. But really excited to bring you this conversation. So here's Nate, and listen to us nerd out.
Of course, I found out about your podcast. I can't pinpoint the year, but it definitely was via, 99% Invisible, where either was a recommendation, Roman spoke about the show, and immediately gravitated towards the general idea of the show. Deep dives into, forgotten people of history, like that, captivated me already. But then I was like, this is different, because this is like nerdy on 4 different levels.
Sure.
And us obsessive people like recognize each other immediately. So I already felt a kinship to you. I was like, okay, Nate is probably one of us, and I just need to figure that out. And not everybody has that obsessive curiosity, if it's finding out about a first band 7-inch and like, oh, I got to have their demo tape next or whatever. Has that just always kind of like been hardwired in you, where it's like, oh yeah, I got to dig like 7 layers deeper. I'm not just a surface level sort of person.
No, actually, to a certain degree, I think I'm a little bit of a surface level sort of person. Okay. I mean, like, I think that actually, even though there were definitely periods of my life in which I was a real sort of, physical rabbit holer, meaning that like you do figure out who plays drums on that 7-inch, and then you go order that other 7-inch, and you follow the sort of like those sort of chains of connection. The thing that I've never been is a completist. Like, I really have always sort of I've always like kind of liked knowing a little about a lot of stuff. I've just like really just been sort of an extremely kind of excitable person, that I just get so stoked on knowing that little thing that unlocks a different set of aesthetics. Like, I'm sort of never happier than when I am learning like the kind of like rules and learning the different mechanisms by which different things are judged. And so that can be that I like watching the Olympics and watching some sport that I've never seen before, and then a couple hours into it being like, aha, that loser just executed a perfect, Danish like toe stop. And therefore they picked up, an extra 10 seconds in the curve. Or, I have no tattoos, yet there's almost no show I enjoy more than Ink Master. And I can, which is the reality competition show with Dave Navarro.
Oh, yes. Very familiar. Right.
Totally. And I like know the inside and outside, inside and outside, the aesthetics and what makes a good tattoo. But I also have done that, with pottery, et cetera, on different TV shows. But it's mostly just that like, I am sort of like an enthusiast, but it really is just trying to find things that I find beautiful and that move me, and how can I get something, out of this thing that is personally useful. And so when it comes to the Memory Palace, even, some of how stories are generated and some of the instinct to do it is this kind of like constant wandering and wanting to know new stuff and wanting to figure out new things. But when it comes to death, besides that, like sometimes you really do have to go in depth to research it, et cetera. The rules, for me, and the guiding sort of principle is I am only going as deep as I need to. And it's not just because like that's how the work gets done, but it is because like I'm going as deep, into learning about this historical figure or this historical moment, only enough to sort of get my head around it and draw something out of it that I find like personally moving or personally useful. And so it is interesting. Like I don't have an obsessive streak or a completist streak. Like there, even though like there were definitely like those few bands that I wanted to make sure I had everything, but it was never like to demonstrate that I had it, or the sort of like classic kind of hipsters game of one-upmanship. It was literally because, there's another song out there. I need to hear it because I also might love that too.
Right. You're like you're a professional dabbler.
Yeah, I think so.
Right.
I think so.
I think you not only articulated the show well, so way to go, but I think that idea of you're getting out of it what you kind of put into it, and I don't mean that in like a myopic fashion. Sure. Like you're finding the thing that you gravitate towards, and that is what you are wrapping the whole conceit around, rather than like, oh yes, I've already researched this person exhaustively, and then you'll reverse engineer it from there.
No, I think that's true. I think that the reason why the stories work is because when it was originally conceived, and I think this has basically sort of still been true. I remember watching like the Ken Burns documentary about Lewis and Clark, which is something I was marginally interested in. I watched it, over the course of many hours, kind of laid up, late one night at a friend's apartment when there was sort of nothing else on TV, in a friend's apartment who had no cable kind of thing. And we got sort of sucked in, and it was pretty interesting. But there was one sort of moment in it that must come like 4.5 hours in, which is just so moving and beautiful. And I got to that moment because I had watched the previous 4.5 hours, and I now knew everything. And but I wanted to find out if I could make a show that was only about those moments. That it was like what can I do to is there a way, like a song does, is there a way to essentially to move someone through storytelling, through like literally just like, let me tell you the same kind of story that Ken Burns might tell in 4.5 hours. Is there a way to do that in 4.5 minutes? And I was, because so many times, like when you're, on a road trip or you're talking to your spouse or whatever, and they have just read something that thrills them, in the paper or in a magazine or whatever, or they've heard some amazing story. It is their energy and their excitement that translates the story for you. But it is ultimately them reflecting on, why does this story matter to me? Like, why am I connecting to this thing so deeply? And then giving you just that like little anecdote, just giving you that little, that the fact that the story all hangs on, and saying like, isn't this cool? And to me, that like, isn't this cool is what relationships are built on, but it's also like, it's what the best kind of introductions to art are based on. It's the friend that you're walking through the museum with who like shows you a painting you might have passed by, but then says like, God, look at this thing. And it's their excitement and seeing it through their eyes in part that allows you to, kind of absorb their love in a way. And so that's always kind of been like the mission of the show, if there is one, which is, it isn't to like remember anything in particular. And it isn't to, make sure that these people, aren't forgotten, or to like lift them up so they're on a par with other figures, and sort of remember. It is to kind of like merely connect, with people around things that have moved me, and to try to sort of move them in the same way that I was at one point myself.
Sure. No, the through line that I'm or the thread that I wanted to pull on there was just that notion of the passion economy, like when you are evangelizing for a thing, whether it's a podcast, whether it's a record or whatever, when you bring it to a person, like they're going to see it through your lens as opposed to vice versa. And so that's like, I always get, and I'm sure you maybe don't actively get frustrated, but it's just like when people have put your particular show where it's like, yeah, it's a history podcast. And it's like, well, yes, I guess in like broad terms it is, but it's like, look at this crazy thing about what happened to this human. Like that's, and that's obviously more difficult to describe, but I see exactly what you're talking about.
No, I've never. I feel like I'm not sure that a person listening to this right now actually understands what the show is about, and that is on me because I've never been able to boil it down effectively. And I don't doubt that that's the strength of the show. Like I that's great. Like I'm proud of that, etc. But at the same time, like I totally bristled when it's like, oh, it's a history show. There's these. It's about. I'm going to tell you these stories about, things that have slipped through the cracks. I'm like, I don't know if I would listen to that show.
Yeah, totally. Like I may just fall asleep by listening to the first 30 seconds of it. Yeah,
totally.
We'll be able to hit on some of your, music interests and stuff like that. But I wanted to, focus on the fact like you're born and raised in Providence, correct?
Correct. Yes.
And, Providence is such an interesting town for a myriad of reasons, but, more specifically kind of with the music of that particular town, because, it's a large enough city, but it's obviously a small enough city that there is that sort of communal aspect. But then there's been such interesting music that's come out of, Rhode Island, in particular. And what was your kind of like first entry point to, I guess like independent music and stuff that you were finding on your own as opposed to, your parents or, older siblings and stuff like that?
Yeah. I mean, I think that the truth of the matter is that I think that that story does begin with my dad in that like, he loved music and had a big record collection. And in a lot of ways, his sort of struggle as like a music fan kind of listening on his own was that same sort of question that everyone sort of has at one point, which is essentially like, why is this thing popular and this thing isn't, And so he, has on the one hand kind of quite straightforward, guy who, graduated college in 1967 music taste in that like he, loves strains of classic rock, et cetera. But he, kind of never necessarily accepted the classic rock canon. Like all along he would, he might have bought like the top 10 or the top 20 from Rolling Stone in 1969 or whatever. But like while over time, the music of that year just kind of became this record by the Doors, this record by the Beatles, this record by the Rolling Stones and the Beach Boys, et cetera. My dad, remembered and clung to that. No, the number 19 record is my favorite record. And that was by Spirit, or that was by Love, or that was by these bands that, only sort of have kind of been discovered and lauded later on, but just kind of never, grabbed hold in the consciousness. And so he was very, he really championed his own taste. And so some of it would be like, oh, you should listen to this band. I love them. You'll like them too. But within that was also the message that, that these guys are getting a raw deal by history,
Sure.
And so as a result, like I really think that like part of my, interest in discovering music that other people didn't like or that other people weren't into was really kind of fostered by the sense that my dad had that people liked the wrong music, and or they liked the wrong album by the Rolling Stones, because my dad loves the Stones and the Beatles and all that stuff, but that there was always like that there were always these sort of alternative avenues even within this sort of mainstream of things. And so when one kind of becomes I think I really fell in love with music as like a solo listening experience when I was sort of in sixth grade, and it was very much kind of encouraged by my father in that like his record collection was full of stuff that would be interesting to me. But because it was so sort of like large, his collection, like I was able to like claim things that felt like my own. And so, he had a couple of, so like I was super into Lou Reed in sixth grade, and I really got into Talking Heads, and, he had all of those things. There weren't his favorite albums, but he had a couple Talking Heads albums, and he had a few, Lou records here and there. And he was so happy to have me kind of pull them out and make them my own. But there was something, getting to your original question a long time later, there was something about my knowledge that the Talking Heads, who I loved and who I also knew were a big deal because I also read his Rolling Stones and stuff like that, were started at the Rhode Island School of Design. That was a very exciting idea for me. That, David Byrne, who was like at the time kind of like a personal hero, just kind of showed me what a weird white guy could do, essentially.
Right.
Had worked at the hot dog place that we used to go to, and before my time, and that was really exciting. And so I think that a lot of my experience with the idea of music making, and the idea of Providence as a music city and Boston as a music city just up the road, was this kind of first inclination that sort of that the experience of making music, and also frankly the experience of stardom within music, was a theoretically accessible thing. And so as kind of high school went on, we had kind of a big alternative radio station, that was run by Brown, but was very by Brown University, but was very kind of straightforward in that it was The Cure and the Smiths, et cetera. And in middle school and high school, it was interesting because the truth of the matter is, I think that I grew up in Providence, then we moved across the border into rural Massachusetts, even though it was only 15 minutes away. And then I kind of returned there in the middle of college, and then after college back to Providence. But in our smaller town just over the border, you didn't need to do a thing to seem like you were a transgressive or an art weirdo or whatever, than to merely listen to The Cure or something like that. That's all it took. And
Sure.
so on some level, there wasn't that much more need to kind of dig deeper, because you could just flip on the radio and you got to feel unique and special and see and understand who was your tribe. But there were just so many trips to the record store, often just kind of hand in hand with my dad, when he'd be going to, I don't know, buy an Emily Lou Harris record or whatever, and I would be going to find something that I had heard on the radio, or that I'd started to see the bands that I was into wearing the T-shirts of, to see a T-shirt on one of the members of the Blake Babies, that was a Dinosaur Jr. shirt, or that was a Nirvana shirt, Bleach Era Nirvana shirt, or a Sonic Youth shirt. Those things just kind of kept opening those doors. But when I think about that time, I think actually what was so interesting to me, and what was part, besides the music being important to me, the idea that was kind of interesting to me was just kind of sorting out taste and hierarchy, and who gets to say what's good, and who gets to say what isn't, and finding these things that that was just when I'm starting to find these bands that I cannot believe aren't the biggest bands in the world,
Right.
And but it really wasn't. But when I went off to college actually went to UC Santa Barbara for a couple of years.
You're a gaucho.
I was gaucho. Well, I was a gaucho. Then I was a banana slug for a couple semesters.
Oh, sure.
And then I left. Then I left school, and then and then I moved back to Rhode Island, and I was a Rhode Island college anchorman for the end of it. But it was going to school, and kind of meeting these kind of West Coast kids, and who and then in my and just sort of being at college and starting to go to DIY shows at the UFCW Hall in Goleta, north of Santa Barbara, was really transformative. Being able to see, a kid my age, putting on shows and being oh, I like this band from Olympia. Let me literally just call them and get them down here. That was my first exposure to DIY, to the DIY scene And it also like was also my first opening to heavy things that weren't like my brother's Maiden records, you know, and like, you know, hardcore from, you know, like Gravity Records and like Ebullition and, you know, just in that scene where the shows were either booked by this kind of, you know, young townie, or by this guy, Kent McClard, who ran Ebullition Records, who would bring in like bands like Struggle and Iconoclast and stuff. It was either, there was this sort of mix where you get these shows that were hard and heavy and exciting, you know, to me, and like felt really new. And, were so sort of like in whose politics, like bands like Los Crudos and Spitboy, whose like politics were so exciting and accessible. But at the same time, like also bringing in, that sort of like Pacific Northwestern, like non-hardcore strain, like these Kill Rock Stars bands and like K Records bands and things. And like, and seeing, you know, these things that were also like essentially just as good as pop songwriters and as sort of like alternative presences as all that stuff that I'd sort of been listening to all through high school. It was so exciting, you know, not just to sort of like be in the room, you know, it's that wonderful thing of being in the room with peers who were making things that were as good as anything else. Is fundamentally like, you know, it's like in some ways it's about as important a thing as ever happened to me.
Band merch is the name of the game when you are supporting independent bands, and Rockabilia.com is the place that not only outfits you with the latest and greatest in regards to band merch, but it pays all of the bands. This is not some, you know, 2 cents a stream sort of scenario. You know, no shots against, you know, those streaming platforms. But, you know, if you want to put money directly into the artist's pocket, best way you can do that is buy band merch. Use this code PC100words. That gets you 15% off your order, and it will be supporting this awesome independent company called Rockabilia. So I can't begin to tell you how much stuff they have, because they have over 500,000 items, and it's fast shipping, amazing customer service. You can get everything from, you know, hats and beanies. Sometimes in Canada, they call them toques, long sleeves, sweaters. They even have sweats, puzzles, whatever you can think of, they have it. But I love this company, and you should check out rockabilia.com and use the code PC100words. That gets you 15% off your order. So thank you very much, Rockabilia. The holidays are descending upon us. Everyone is running around like crazy people trying to get their shopping done. Let me just solve that problem for you. No one is ever going to say no to this gift. And this gift is the Raycon wireless earbuds, headphones, or speakers. I love all of these products unequivocally. I use them every single day. And what makes them even cooler? They have 54 hours of battery life. They have a very comfortable fit. They will not fall out. I love them so much. They also have these rad holiday bundles. My personal favorite is the Audio Lover, which includes the everyday earbuds and the everyday headphones. So please, right now, go to buyraycon.com/Ray and use the code EARLYBF to get 20% off site-wide. That's 20% off of any Raycon product, which seriously never happens. Or you can save even bigger and get 30% off of Raycon's exclusive holiday bundles. That Audio Lover thing I was telling you about, do that. That's code EARLYBF at buyraycon.com/Ray for 20% off your Raycon purchase. Buyraycon.com/Ray and solve all of your holiday gift giving problems for your dad, your mom, your brother, sister. I don't care who, put it in their stocking. They will love you. Buyraycon.com/Ray, code EARLYBF. I love dogs so much. That's why I'm incredibly excited to welcome Embark on as a sponsor. They are a dog DNA testing kit, and what makes them cool is they scan for 215 genetic health risks across 350 breeds. And I want to give you $60 off and free shipping. So go to embarkvet.com, use the promo code RAY, and it unlocks that offer. And it also unlocks so many cool things that you can find out about your pup. And it's super easy. You get a little test tube with a Q-tip, you put it in the pup's mouth, send it back to Embark. They email you all of these results. It's very fast, easy, and I love doing it. 72% of pup parents are puzzled when it comes to their dog's breed. It's time to end these guessing games. This holiday season, give the dog lover in your life something they won't expect. the chance to decode their dog. It's the perfect time to shop for an Embark dog DNA test. Right now, Embark has a limited time offer on their Breed and Health Kit and Purebred Kit for listeners of this show. Go to embarkvet.com to get free shipping and save $60 with promo code RAY. Visit embarkvet.com and use promo code RAY to save $60 today. Do it for your pup. This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. Wouldn't it be absolutely incredible if you got an instruction guide for life, where you're going through some relationship issues or drama at work or whatever challenging situation that is presented to you? You got a little pamphlet that helped you walk through that. What's awesome about therapy is that it kind of is. You're able to speak to a third person, talk about the issues you're having, and they can maybe offer some solutions for you that you can get unstuck. BetterHelp has connected over 3 million people and counting with licensed therapists, 100% online. So that means it is more convenient, more accessible, and more affordable. You just fill out a brief questionnaire and you get matched with the therapist in less than 48 hours. If things are not vibing between you and the therapist, you can switch out to a new therapist at any time. You got no waiting rooms, no traffic, no endless searching for the right therapist. It's an amazing service and I wholeheartedly endorse them. Learn more and save 10% off your first month when you sign up today at betterhelp.com/Ray. That's betterhelp.com/Ray. Get some therapy and get unstuck.
I did not know that you had the Santa Barbara experience, because that is like, it's very foundational for me as well. I was I was dating a girl that went to UCSB, so like went to shows at the Living Room, the Pickle Patch, like became.
It's a little bit after my time, but yeah.
Yeah, but like, became friends with Kent McClard and Lisa over at Ebullition. Sure. And it's like, and then, because those bands also came down to Southern California a ton, like Yaphet Kotto and like all of that stuff.
Yeah.
Like, it was, I find it so interesting that happened. I mean, it makes sense that it happens in a college town, but there, to your point, there was something that's so essential to the antithesis of what Heart Attack and Ebullition was putting out, where it's like, oh yeah, we're not going to review records with barcodes, and like all this wild stuff that you're like, wow, I didn't even consider it. And whether or not you agreed with it, you at least had to reckon with it in your own head about how you felt about it. Totally. And I think that's exactly what you're talking about, where all of these things were getting introduced to you in like breakneck fashion. And then you had to reckon with all of it and be like, oh yeah. And then on top of it, there's some pretty cool music too.
Totally. And in like, I mean, and then on the one hand, it's like, that's the cliche of college, right? It's just like, it's what you're supposed to figure out. But it's a fascinating, I mean, I do think that period, and I'm not going to pretend that like one generation's music is better than the other. Like I don't really care about that at the moment. Yep. But the thing that is, I really am sure. And I walk around with the idea that, like Gen X is kind of a bullshit generation, but that said, we were also right about a ton of stuff, and, it's all just, we were right about the politics of corporatism, and we were right about the environment and, and to kind of like, have borne witness, and been around, and just kind of like, cut your teeth on where you could just be like a regular MTV viewer and having to like sort of like reckon with, Soy Bomb at the MTV Movie Awards or Music Awards, or with, Michael Stipe, tearing off his various t-shirts with his various slogans, or whether it's like motor voter laws or whatever. There was sort of like an engaged mainstream politics that made the underground politics such an interesting, field to navigate. And that thing of like coming from being sort of comfortably alternative, and, loving the Pixies and the first Smashing Pumpkins album, and all that kind of stuff, to then, going into the sort of like, Kent McClard world and the Kill Rock Stars world, was like, there was something like I felt very kind of open-hearted to it. But also like very aware that like I did not need to personally fall into the pitfalls of like, getting into, war. Like I did not need to go to war over the barcode or whatever at the same time.
Sure. Like, I mean, you don't want to use the word culture wars to exist because that means a much different thing in the broader context of society.
Exactly.
But like,
Sure.
that's it. But yeah, that's what I mean. At one point, that is what people in the quote unquote scene that were, really trying to create stuff. That is what they cared about. And then,
Totally.
like you're talking about, you're watching on the side, being like, I care about certain aspects of this, but that seems a little trivial.
No, but no, it wasn't. But the truth of the matter is, it wasn't that. One of the most formative books for me, even though it's not necessarily even that good, but I read it sort of around this time, was this book called The Strawberry Statement, which is this memoir by this dude, and I use that word very specifically. There's this kid who was at Columbia during the time of the building takeovers and the anti-war protests, etc. And it's just this kind of running diary about him occupying various buildings and stuff. And he is very much just a guy who is going along and kind of wants to meet girls and is kind of a poser, and then would find himself in these situations where he was suddenly galvanized. And it wasn't that I connected with him, but what I saw in him was just that it is okay to be that the culture gets moved because other people are willing to fight over barcodes, and
yeah, that's true.
That fundamentally, even if, there were times and periods, and issues upon which I was not particularly radical, or other people or my friends' radicalism was alienating on some level. It was very clear to me, even at that time, and it's just become more clear, over time, as I've gotten older, that it is just fundamentally it is a necessary service to be fucking hardcore. Yeah. It really is. Yeah. And so there was just something, there was something, particularly in that scene, even though I, then kind of went on to be in other versions of it. There was something, so just fundamentally beautiful about the kind of young people, being a part of this thing where young people were making their own world, were finding their own aesthetics, were doing it themselves. And it was it was this really kind of powerful, it was a very sort of beautiful experience and a really, formative and fun. But it also, over and over and over again, it was just, I've always wanted some version of that. In nearly every kind of collaboration. I was just, I've become convinced sort of ever since, that Ian MacKaye and Candace Peterson at K Records and Kent McLeod in his own way, and my friend Ben McCosker who ran Load Records in Providence, that is the right way to be a business person in the world. That to find that to allow your artists to own their masters, or to have 50 splits, to really think about what you as the business owner is getting out of your employees, and make sure they are properly compensated by giving them an ownership stake, etc. That it is so vitally important to me as a person who makes a living making art, to be in a structure that allows me to do that, and with Radiotopia. And if Radiotopia didn't exist, then there's I can't imagine doing this in some way that wasn't sort of directly listener supported. And I don't know, to me, when I think about sort of Generation X being right, I'm not sure there's a better example of it than that.
Sure. I appreciate that articulation, because I do think that when you have been exposed to that, and I think that's why this stuff is so foundational in our DNA, because once you experience the idea of DIY, doing it yourself, and not in the proverbial, because that term is so cliched now, it doesn't mean anything, but it's just the idea of, oh yeah, I don't need to ask permission. Of course I'm going to do this show. And of course I'm going to start a band. Of course I'm going to put out a 7-inch, all that stuff. You don't even know you're developing business acumen or accounting or like all that. You're just doing it, and then you take that and you apply it to different areas of your life. And that's obviously why, so many people spin off doing all of these interesting things that might not directly be applicable to the fact that like, oh, you're putting out records, or, oh, you're playing in a band. You're like, well, I'm doing this other thing. And it's just completely influenced by everything that I experienced in these small, sweaty rooms.
Yeah, totally. It's just like, how many people do you know who like, whose like uncle might have thought they were a fuck up, until they were 28, 29. But then, even if they frankly went to like some corporate job or whatever, they went at 28 or 29 or 30 and they started skipping steps because they'd actually been spending the past several years like doing stuff, whether it was booking shows or booking tours, or learning how to do technical things that allowed them to, jump into film editing or whatever it was. Like all of the things, all of those those sort of traditional kind of like DIY, skills and habits were ultimately like professional habits. And, even if one wanted to sell out, so to speak, sure. You were able, you had not been fucking around while you were fucking around, which I really appreciate.
Yeah, no, for sure. And so, kind of looking at the fact of, when you were starting to kind of navigate what the heck it was that you wanted to quote unquote do with your life,
Sure.
Did you ever have the idea that yes, I want to play in a band, or did that seem so?
Yeah, no, I definitely did. Like, I played in, I was like I was the world's worst punk rock drummer in band Santa Cruz. And I was in a band in high school, like this sort of, weird, we were like a weird alternative band, making goofy songs. And then, when I returned to Providence, I had left, Santa Cruz. It was, essentially what should have been my senior year in college was a little bit of like it became my junior year. And, I went, started to go to Rhode Island College, where my parents both taught special ed. So I was able to go essentially for free, which it allowed me to like do it. And then, I essentially got into the music scene and started playing in, a kind of like noise pop band, called Bermuda, that like had like a really solid kind of like year and a half or so of like getting to, open up for bands we loved, et cetera. And, put out a 7-inch and play out of town a little bit. But, in that itself, like the, always kind of having, not only was it like, I did have experience of playing shows and having that thing of, getting to just kind of like meet other bands and like feel like a part of it. It wasn't sort of until I kind of returned to Providence and I was like 23, 24 or so, and playing in that band that like I had the deeply formative experience of like having kind of like pulled off a thing that I've always wanted to do, which is, which is the thing that that I want for my daughter, just like to be able to be like, oh, I've admired people that do this thing and here I am doing it. What better can there be for, someone in their 20s? But also there was just this like great experience of, opening up for people whose music I just loved and people who like, I was just so excited to know and occasionally have them be cool, but like more often than not, just like have them kind of be sort of lame or like super weirdos. There was something that as, a person trying to figure out what, not just what to do, but also like what I could be in the world. There was something so empowering and just fundamentally starting to realize that like, oh, like, put the music on the pedestal. You don't need to put the person on the pedestal. This thing about like the musicians, getting, being one myself, getting to know people who were, and, really starting at the time to kind of like get into history and stuff like that. And just starting to like, just fundamentally know that the people you read about are just people, which is not something I know. I don't know that I necessarily knew, but it was, but like that experience of just kind of like, I had sort of been on the scene in terms of like going to shows for years, like, when I'd be home from school and going to see like a pretty thriving indie rock scene in Providence. But then when I really kind of moved back, that's when, that's when they're like the sort of like Fort Thunder bands, like which was like Lightning Bolt and all those guys, which was an entirely different kind of DIY scene, in that like it wasn't quite as political, and it wasn't quite like it didn't have the culture war things. It was ultimately just kind of like a art school music scene, but it was also just like fundamentally, so much of it was just phenomenal. So much of it was just this experience of just sort of like watching Lightning Bolt, in Brian Chippendale's, loft or whatever, and surrounded by like, friends and strangers, et cetera. And just being fundamentally sure that this was as good a place as you could possibly be in the world at that moment. Like that experience, and like, in being, like by far, like, probably the most formative show I ever saw, was, like 17 people or so, at the UFCW hall in Santa Barbara in Goleta, and seeing this band called Portraits of Past. And it was just, they played for 14 minutes, and I was just like, it was just as good a 14 minutes as I've ever spent in my life. And it was just this feeling of just like being so sure of the value of the things that I loved, and being so sure that I did not need external, measures of that value. I did not need Portraits of Past to be on the cover of Rolling Stone, and I didn't need, Lightning Bolt to whatever, to open up, to be on the main stage of Lollapalooza or whatever, that like, I could trust myself. And that, that sort of combination of learning that like, oh, anyone can do this thing, if you work hard enough and you hustle, but also that there are these things that you love that you just know are right, has totally been the things that guided me toward doing something like the Memory Palace, and then being the I don't know, like the internal drive of just being like, no, if I like this thing, it's worth doing. If this thing moves me, then it's worth putting out, etc. And there's no way that I'd be doing anything close to what I'm doing if I hadn't had those experiences.
Sure. I really, I love that. I mean, that you articulated that feeling so appropriately in regards to, being in that room, seeing that thing happening. And it's like, it's like you're looking around just being like, are you seeing this? Like, this is insane. Like, I'm watching an albatross freak out in front of me or whatever. Like, you're just, you have that. And it's so hard to describe to a person who hasn't been there. And I know that sounds like so elitist, but it's just, it's true. It's just the actual fact.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
And so as you started to, kind of do a bunch of things within the context of, all different colleges you were going to and the studies that you were pursuing, what was the life path as it was kind of like laid out to you in regards to the pursuit that you wanted to, focus on?
I think that was in the band that was finally pretty good, and the band broke up, for sort of like interpersonal reasons. And it was such like a loss, because it was just such like, it was this thing that I just loved doing, and something that had felt so right. And it was something that I'd been wanting to do for so long. And, but it was so sort of like purely correct for like, oh, this should be like part of my life. But I also like, I wasn't that good. I'm like weirdly a pretty good drummer now, from like playing in my garage with like my electronic drum kit. But like in college, I was a terrible drummer. And then in this band, I sang and played guitar, but the drummer and the guy who played bass were so much better than I was. And their whole thing was like, let's take Nate's songs and like, let's elevate them and whatever. And as a result, like I was never a person who could, I could barely play with them. And so I was not a person who could then go and just like start some other band. Like they were better than I was. There was some kind of magic in the way that we all three, worked together. But a lot of that was that they were like willing to work around me. And so I just kind of knew that I could not like replicate the same thing on this at the same level. Like I just wasn't going to likely be able to kind of like catch that kind of like lightning in a bottle. And which is both kind of a depressing thought, but it was also like bracing in that I was like, okay, how can I not, what do I love about this thing? And how can I not let it slip away? So what is it that I love about doing this thing? Because like, I can also look ahead and see that pretty soon I might feel a little bit too old for some of these rooms. Mm-hmm. And so like, even if I had another thing to just shift into, another band to just shift into, like, I don't know, like at some point, like I know myself and I'm going to want to feel responsible. And I'm going to want to make like enough money to make sure that I'm paying my own bills, et cetera. And I can't, I know that I can't, entirely like live, parking cars and making $75 a night or whatever, playing music. And so I really just was like really reflective and like really just kind of like interrogated like what it was I loved about playing in a band. And a lot of it was stuff like, I want the possibility to travel. Like I want to make beautiful things. Like I love working really hard to like get ready for a thing and then like presenting it publicly and then having it just be over and then starting all over again. And I just started to try to figure out like, what is the thing that will allow me to do that? I ended up kind of like stumbling toward the knowledge that like radio might do that, and particularly like public radio might do that, that like there might be a way to like, work for This American Life or like report for All Things Considered or whatever, that would be collaborative, that would like allow me to travel, that would like have me, having interesting experiences and meeting interesting people and all the stuff that like was the promise of being in a band. While also, on a good day, like really being able to like make something that, had the same kind of power that like a song did, like I remember, since I've been very, very little, I've been like semi obsessed with thinking about like music and memory and just the real magic of being kind of like taken over by a song. And and thinking particularly about the way that worked in radio. And I remember very specifically, like just driving around and catching some story in All Things Considered, which was just so like devastating. It was just a tragic story. And thinking to myself that like, oh, this is the only other thing that can do the same thing that music does, is like listening to the radio, not knowing what to expect, and then having something like come into your life accidentally and change it temporarily, and just like whether it's just to change the trajectory of your day and like bring like a different kind of emotionality. Like that really doesn't happen in any kind of structured way, but that's the thing that I love most about life. It's like, it's running into the friend, like to me, the perfect day, which is so hard to replicate as you're older and hard to replicate in LA by the nature, and certainly impossible to do in the pandemic, is bumping into someone you haven't seen for a while who says, "Oh, I'm about to do this thing. Do you want to come?" you know, like that. And I knew that there's something about being in the music scene. There's something about, being in a band that was baked into the experience. And I wanted to find a career that allowed me to live that way. And it worked out.
The holidays are descending upon us. Everyone is running around like crazy people trying to get their shopping done. Let me just solve that problem for you. No one is ever going to say no to this gift. And this gift is the Raycon wireless earbuds, headphones, or speakers. I love all of these products unequivocally. I use them every single day. And what makes them even cooler? They have 54 hours of battery life. They have a very comfortable fit. They will not fall out. I love them so much. They also have these rad holiday bundles. My personal favorite is the Audio Lover, which includes the everyday earbuds and the everyday headphones. So please, right now, go to buyraycon.com/Ray and use the code EARLYBF to get 20% off site-wide. That's 20% off of any Raycon product, which seriously never happens. Or you can save even bigger and get 30% off of Raycon's exclusive holiday bundles. That audio lover thing I was telling you about, do that. That's code EARLYBF at buyraycon.com/Ray for 20% off your Raycon purchase. Buyraycon.com/Ray and solve all of your holiday gift giving problems for your dad, your mom, your brother, sister. I don't care who, put it in their stocking. They will love you. Buyraycon.com/Ray, code EARLYBF. I love dogs so much. That's why I'm incredibly excited to welcome Embark on as a sponsor. They are a dog DNA testing kit, and what makes them cool is they scan for 215 genetic health risks across 350 breeds. And I want to give you $60 off and free shipping. So go to embarkvet.com, use the promo code RAY, and it unlocks that offer. And it also unlocks so many cool things that you can find out about your pup. And it's super easy. You get a little test tube with a Q-tip, you put it in the pup's mouth, send it back to Embark. They email you all of these results. It's very fast, easy, and I love doing it. 72% of pup parents are puzzled when it comes to their dog's breed. It's time to end these guessing games. This holiday season, give the dog lover in your life something they won't expect, the chance to decode their dog. It's the perfect time to shop for an Embark dog DNA test. Right now, Embark has a limited time offer on their breed and health kit and purebred kit for listeners of this show. Go to embarkvet.com to get free shipping and save $60 with promo code RAY. Visit embarkvet.com and use promo code RAY to save $60 today. Do it for your pup. This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. Wouldn't it be absolutely incredible if you got an instruction guide for life, where you're going through some relationship issues or drama at work or whatever challenging situation that is presented to you? You got a little pamphlet that helped you walk through that. What's awesome about therapy is that it kind of is. You're able to speak to a third person, talk about the issues you're having, and they can maybe offer some solutions for you that you can get unstuck. BetterHelp has connected over 3 million people and counting with licensed therapists, 100% online. So that means it is more convenient, more accessible, and more affordable. You just fill out a brief questionnaire and you get matched with the therapist in less than 48 hours. If things are not vibing between you and the therapist, you can switch out to a new therapist at any time. You got no waiting rooms, no traffic, no endless searching for the right therapist. It's an amazing service and I wholeheartedly endorse them. Learn more and save 10% off your first month when you sign up today at betterhelp.com/Ray. That's betterhelp.com/Ray. Get some therapy and get unstuck.
For the most part.
Sure. Right. Yeah. There's always a circuitous route to these things, but yeah. I'm sure that this, this thought has maybe permeated in your head as well in regards to, I mean, once you started to, like you said, work in radio and have the idea to, do the Memory Palace and everything. And, clearly not clearly, but you are obviously also writing for TV and movies and stuff like that. The idea of, imposter syndrome, where, especially from where we kind of come from, just the idea that like when we're interacting with quote unquote normal civilians, and I use that, not in a non-pejorative manner, but like that idea creeps in your head where it's just like, well, these people did it the right way. And I obviously like, how the hell am I here? Does that, I guess, ever kind of come into your head as far as like, oh, I'm in this writer's room at Parks and Rec and I'm doing this, or, I guess I'm making a movie. How does that ping pong in your head?
Wait, I'm sorry. I actually need you to kind of answer the question again. Ask the question again. I'm not sure that I understand it.
No, it's totally fine. Mm-hmm. So with the notion of, as you started to be a professional human and start to interact with people that have, not had the same experiences that we've had, not saying that that's good or bad. The idea of imposter syndrome comes up where you are feeling like, okay, I know how I got here. Which is a non-conventional way. Most of these other people probably did the right way, going to school, getting an internship, doing the thing. And I know in creative arts, it's a little bit, more movable. But, as you started to step into these things and we're doing the adult stuff, did you feel that kind of like, wow, what am I doing here? Like, this is weird.
No, I mean, no, I don't think, no, I didn't, in part because I think that like a lot of that work got done early. That like
okay, sure.
that there was something about the experience of being the sort of like DIY show experience and stuff like that there was this like, it was just so clear that that alternative ways of living were almost were better. That like it didn't mean that like one couldn't sort of aspire to like nuclear family and house in the suburbs or whatever. Like it wasn't in a judgmental way, but just that when it all came down to it, like that the paths that like these people were taking to be in those rooms, there was no sort of rule book for, and that when they got there, they were experiencing something that was magic and that was on par with any other experience one could have on that evening anywhere in the world. And so I think that like that idea about like whether it was like kind of like helping build sort of like it wasn't just that it was kind of like helping build sort of like self-belief and like a kind of like confidence that would allow me in certain areas to like push aside imposter syndrome. It was just that fundamentally no one could, this is a dumb thing to say, but like that, like if Keith Richards or whatever, or if the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame told, Portraits of Past or something like that, sure. or Mohinder that like they weren't valid and worthy, then like it was idiotic.
Right. Totally.
And so like, I think that there really is something, about that kind of like rooted into it. Like it definitely, there was also a little bit of like a chip on my shoulder. Like there was something about, about being proud of like, coming from like graduating from, a commuter school that advertises on television, and yet like being able to like be in a room with like, Ivy League graduates or whatever like that. There was something like, if anything, it was like, it was like a sign of honor as opposed to making me feel less than.
Right. No, that's a good point. You definitely, especially too, when, you're talking about these younger years when you're, I mean, even if you're playing shows in front of, 15 people, there's still that, performative nature, you getting in front of people, like all those things that many humans experience fear for, like you just do. And you're just like, well, of course I'm playing a show. Like, so there's no fear in that. I'm just going to, I'll drop a stick, but like, I'll pick one up and I'll figure it out from there. So I see that direct correlation of what you're talking about.
And then the other really important thing about particularly the DIY scene as it was like constituted on the West Coast, and particularly in Goleta, and I got the sense that it was similar in San Diego and certainly definitely in Olympia and in Portland and stuff like that, was that it wasn't like a lot of East Coast hardcore that like I was from like vaguely familiar with, like from like older kids or going to record stores, like bands like Slapshot and stuff. Like there was just something so broy about it. And like as like a sensitive, like a super sensitive, like overly sensitive, like teenager, then like going to these shows and to see them, to like, see bands like Heavens to Betsy or like Spit Boy, and to kind of like be a little bit of like witness to some of the, but certainly peripheral to some of the, the kind of like controversies that would like bubble up around like gender and identity, and in other sort of like identity issues in like the pages of Heart Attack or at shows and stuff like that, that like those things too about sort of like, demanding that, I don't know, that power structures of all sort of types, like calling bullshit on power structures of all types, was, even just sort of like was weirdly, was sort of empowering across the board, and just like really just like change the way that I would kind of perceive power structures as I would attempt to move into them. And like at the same time, like also sort of like bolstered by like, a gendered white guy confidence, and very aware of that. But at the same time, like they're, I truly, just think about, I think I think about all that I sort of like owe to that period of my life and the way that it, kind of opened me up to the world and gave me certain skills to like operate in the world. But to also just kind of like, know both to kind of like what to demand of the world, but also like to be aware of where I'm sort of like failing the world and failing myself, has just been fundamentally, both formative and generative, like all this time.
Sure. When for you, specifically with Memory Palace, as you started to put it out there, I mean, like you were talking about, or you didn't mention this, but the idea that the expectations of putting it out there was predominantly on you, where it's like, I get joy out of this, so I am doing this, so I'm going to put this out there. When did you first kind of feel that feedback of like, oh, this is real, like people are caring about it, like how did that transpire?
I mean, it was lucky that it was pretty early on. Some of that was probably, had to do with the work, but I think a lot of it just had to do with, where, podcasting was and where social media was. So like, I released the first episode in like the end of 2008, and it was 100% within the season that everyone got Facebook. And it was just the kind of thing that like, it was before people had, were over it. It was before people had like, were thinking too much about like people just sharing stuff with impunity, And so I like made an episode and I, sent like a note to my public radio friends, and my public radio friends kind of amplified it. And then I, put it, out, and it was just at the time where instead of like, your uncle and some friend you went to high school with, like, clicking like or whatever, like people would just like share. And it weirdly like, grew very quickly, in part because of that. And then like, there were just a couple of like someone at Boing Boing noticed an episode. And then someone at the Freakonomics blog at the New York Times. And so suddenly it went from like having like 300 listeners to having like 17,000 or like 30,000, like really quickly, like 7 episodes in or something. Mm-hmm. In part just because like I think that it was fresh, and people were, interested in finding stuff in a way that like, is just became harder and harder and harder. But for the first like 2-3 years of the show, maybe even longer, I was very much trying to make it work in the straight world. Like I was essentially really trying to make it click in public radio, like to use it as like a springboard for some like hour-long show or whatever. But 2 things happened. And one was that I just realized that, no, this is actually what I like doing. I like these short things. And because it was so clear to me that like, oh, I used to love writing songs, and I'm kind of writing songs again.
Right.
And then the other thing that happened was that it stopped, like, it was very clear professionally that the show was more literally valuable as a calling card than it was on its own terms. And so like to have, a friend of mine, who's one of the creators of Parks and Recreation, be like, oh, let's bring, Nate knows a lot about history because I enjoy his show, and I know personally that he's funny. Like maybe he can like come up with like a historical backstory for, Pawnee, Indiana. And then that led to like writing an episode and stuff like that. And like other, things. It was like very clear that, in order for it to work as a calling card, then it just needed to be consistently really good. And it was very clear that the things that the people were connecting to the most that came calling were often the weirder ones that I liked most personally. And so it was just this demonstrable sign that like, just, it was kind of like, keep doing what you're doing, kid. But the other thing about it was also clear that it was not going to work, but like changing it was not going to get me anywhere. And so there was just this point where, I remembered very specifically thinking back to a night after my band had broken up, and when I was like 24, 25 or something like that. And I was in the car and I was meeting a couple of friends at a movie theater in Providence to see When We Were Kings, that documentary. Mm-hmm. And on like the University of Rhode Island's college station, someone was doing his radio show, and, was playing a couple songs, and then said, man, it's a rainy night. I got a lot going on in my personal life. I'm just going to play stuff that I love tonight. Like I'm throwing out my plans. And then he played, one of the songs from our 7-inch. And I really just remember being kind of heartbroken that it was over, but so excited to kind of hear it at the radio. But mostly I remember like being so excited to hear it in that context, just to like know that there was this connection with this dude who was having a bad time. And it was just like very aware that that right there is the only thing to want. You just want to make something that someone wants played at their funeral or at their wedding or when they're kind of having the bad time. And I remembered thinking, when I was 24, 25 or so, that the best life in the world would be to have an art project with an audience. And so there, whatever it was at 37 or something like that with the Memory Palace, however old I was like, oh shoot, I have that. And I was like, I'm like, well, why want more? Like, yeah, like I'll try to push hard and I'll like try to professionalize it and whatever, but like do it this way. Like, this is where the art lives. Like, this is what it is. Like you're living the dream right now. Like, go find other ways to like,
right. I found it.
Yeah.
Right.
If you need to like find other ways to make a living, fine, but like keep doing this. And, and then it just, the industry changed and matured enough that like Roman was able to like talk to me and be like, I think you can make a living doing this now.
Yeah.
And then to have it be Roman and to be able to be like, to just like have a dude who was like, yeah. I read all that shit. I read every interview I could with Ian MacKaye and I, read, this is just my thing. Like, I want to have like a DIY network that operates that way.
Yep.
That's what we're going to do.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. We're we're taking this over to podcasting, guys.
Thrilling.
Yeah, totally. The last thing I wanted to hit on was well, it's kind of a twofold. Like, for one, how do you interact with music now? Like, do you find yourself just kind of going back to, your old favorites? Do you try to seek out new music, or where does music kind of play a part in what you are, consuming? And then obviously, directly relating to your podcast as well.
Well, I mean, I think that I've never, I continue to be about music. I like music differently. Like, I think as we all do, like, it is difficult to, when you have so many songs that are a part of you, it is difficult to have the new ones that come in. Like, you can't be 17 again, but that said, there hasn't been like a day in my life when I haven't kind of been seeking out something new. And, that might well be just like, oh, let me go back and find the great song off the old Rolling Stones record that I haven't listened to in many years or whatever. But no, like new music, like the quest for new music is just fundamental to who I am. It's just like, I just want to find new stuff that I find beautiful and that I love. So like, yeah, no, I'm constantly just sort of like, whatever, like read like a dude, like reading Pitchfork and Stereogum and stuff. And, and then just sort of like diving through, Spotify, the entirely unproblematic format.
Of course. None. No problems at all. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Just sort of like searching and just like, I just remember a day, I don't know, like 9 years ago, being like, oh, I remember, I just was suddenly like, oh, I remember thinking about Motorhead, and then like knowing that, he was in Hawkwind, and then knowing that the Pink Fairies are involved somehow, and like thinking about all of those sort of proto punk and like proto metal bands that like I've just kind of like heard about but never listened to, and like over the course of like 4.5 hours, like literally listening to everything. And it's just like that incredible gift of like the internet, being able to just be like, whatever. And so on a given day, there's probably, I listen to music all the time, and there's probably, 20 tracks that are new from new bands that I like am obsessed with. And there's also like 20, things that are the digital equivalent of like crate digging. Like I recently got really into the Fleetwoods, which is the which is that like very, very, very twee, very white doo-wop group from the 50s. And I just find like everything they do just so beautiful, as silly as it all is. And I'll be into the Fleetwoods for like 4 more days and then forget about it for months. And then there'll be like the one song that carries with me. But it's perpetual. And then I also like, went on just earlier today, maybe because of this conversation, like went on this like, YouTube dive, like finding those 2 or 3 beloved like indie rock records that, aren't on Spotify and that the CD's all messed up. And, listening to like this band, the God Rays, who were like a Providence band. And then listening to like the first Henry's Dress record, which I love so much and hadn't heard in like 25 years.
Right. It is so like, I mean, music is so transportational. I mean, I don't know if that's a word, but like just
it's transporting, but yeah,
exactly. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? It just, it puts you back in that space. Even if you haven't listened to that record and like, even just saying like band names, like, you saying Ports of the Past, I'm just like, oh gosh, like that just blew some memory. And like, that's what's so interesting about music. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, Nate, I could probably punish you for another hour, but looks like we'll have to start a San Diego hardcore podcast in tangent to this. But thanks for hanging out, dude. I really appreciate it.
I was so happy to talk to you, Ray.
That was such a fun conversation. I know that like it's one of those chats that as I'm having it, I'm just like peeling away the layers of excitement in my own head of just like, whoa, he knows this band. And oh my gosh, this is so exciting. So yeah, thank you very much to Nate for coming on the show. Because like I said, I'm a huge fan of his podcast. And if you have not listened to The Memory Palace, you need to do so immediately because you will greatly enjoy the show. And next week, I have another legend in my own head, and frankly, in many people's heads, Mike Williams. He is the vocalist for I Hate God. And I mean, I can't tell you how excited I am to have him on the show. But again, comparing and contrasting. So this week, we have a podcaster. Next week, we have a legend in the, sludge metal, hardcore, whatever you want to call them. I Hate God is a luminary within that scene. So that's what we got next week. And they have a new record out. So it's all the more exciting. But next week, Mike Williams. I love it. Okay. Until then, please be safe, everybody.
Tired of long waits and rushed care at the ER and urgent care clinic? Next time, stay home and let Dispatch Health bring the power of the hospital to you.
I call Dispatch Health. A care team of medical professionals actually come to your house.
They're the same caliber of people that you would see if you were at a hospital or an urgent care.
Dispatch Health can treat most non-life-threatening emergencies.
They can do the x-rays, they can do stitches,
urinary tract infections, blood test, urinalysis, ultrasound.
It's almost everything that they can do at the ER.
You never feel rushed. They're there for you and only you.
I felt like their only patient.
And it costs no more than a trip to urgent care because Dispatch Health is covered by most insurance, including Medicare. See if we serve your home at dispatchhealth.com.
Dispatch Health really went above and beyond.
It's wonderful to have care come to your home.
House calls are back, and they're better than ever. Learn more at dispatchhealth.com.
The world of chocolate has been turned upside down.
A very unusual situation.
You saw the stacks of cash in our office.
Chocolate comes from the cacao tree, and recently, varieties of cacao thought to have been lost centuries ago were rediscovered in the Amazon.
There is no chocolate on Earth like this.
Now some chocolate makers are racing deep into the jungle to find the next game-changing chocolate, and I'm coming along.
Okay, that was a very large crocodile.
Listen to Obsessions of Wild Chocolate on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
I'm Mo Rocca, and I'm back with Season 3 of my podcast, Mobituaries. I've dug up even more stories about the people and things that fascinate me. From the fruit that once scandalized...
The shape of the banana made it taboo.
...to the band that played second banana to the Beatles.
They were lucky to come in second, and the truth is they only came in second for about 2 months.
Listen to Mobituaries on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.